Okay, so I'm reading this article in the South Sound Business Journal, and I'll include it in the description box below. But it talks about Tacoma, and it talks about where Tacoma was and where it is today. When people talk about Tacoma being a ghetto, or Tacoma was just a place where you saw nothing but prostitutes walking down the street and gangs everywhere and blah 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 blah, that was true. That was very true. None of that, nobody's saying that that didn't happen. That was very, very true. And this was something that was a bad problem in the 80s and even in the mid 90s. That started to change. And the reason why now downtown Tacoma is probably the safest place in the city, statistically, it's the same. The police are saying statistically it's the safest place in the city, is because the city went through and did a lot of hard work. So I have to give Tacoma credit. When people talk about the Tacoma aroma and they talk about, Tacoma is this and that, I tell them, you're talking about something that happened before 1995. Because before 1988, so when you're talking, because looking at this, they're talking about what happened. In 1988, Tacoma had no museums downtown. It didn't have the University of Washington downtown. It didn't have the Convention Center downtown. It didn't have Tolfason Plaza, which is a plaza. It's kind of like a public area where people, do different events and things like that. The Marriott didn't exist. Not only the regular little tiny Marriott, but the big giant one that they're still working on, that didn't exist. There was no federal courthouse. There was no light rail system. The I-705 spur, which connects the city and I-5 together, that didn't exist. And the wasteland, the polluted wasteland in front of the city along the waterway, was still derelict. It had a whole bunch of old, nasty buildings that just sat there, and they were just rotting into the waterway. And later, it became Thea Fossway. Okay? None of those things existed. You didn't have the marina down there. You didn't have any of that. And keep in mind, too, where University of Washington is, a lot of those buildings, some of which are being worked on today, were old buildings that were falling down, and they were derelict. The building, and it goes through and it talks about Union Station. Union Station, they said, stood empty, and it was derelict, and there was rainwater dripping through the tarnished copper dome. I couldn't even imagine that today, but it was so bad that building, which is the one, I've shown it several times, that has the arches, that building, basically, the roof was leaking. And it just sat there empty. North of that, they said you saw a row of brick buildings, and they were known as Tacoma City Underbelly. And it had pawn shops, taverns, and porn stores. And the city voted to remove the historic designation from those buildings, because if they were historic, they couldn't do anything to them. So 14 of those 16 buildings, they knocked them down and turned them into parking lots. And the hope was to discourage people that were doing bad things from being down there. That didn't do anything. It didn't stop them. They still came down there, hung out, that type of thing. Downtown was not the place you wanted to be. 30 years ago, it was a pretty rough area. The one thing that you could see down there was the Tacoma Rescue Mission, and that was pretty much it. You fast forward, and now you have a city where almost $2 billion worth of development's going on. We drove around when Noelle and I went to the brewery. We drove around a little bit, and I was showing her all the development that's going on. And then we went to the Tacoma Town Center. And so she's like, whoa, so all of this is going to be the town center? And I said, yeah. That lot that the town center is going to be sitting on was going to be a police station, but they decided to build the police station outside of downtown, and they wanted that area to be used for development. Back in the day, the Tacoma Dome area, the city was desperate, and they were looking for ways to build up the city, and so they wanted the Tacoma Dome area to kind of be that centerpiece to do that, and basically attract a lot of businesses. It's kind of as if that would be the new downtown, because in the blueprints and the drawings that the city has, you see all these tall buildings that they were planning to get developed there. It's kind of like their hope. That's how bad the city was, right? So they cleaned up a lot of the waterfront. They cleaned out all of those nasty buildings. They knocked them down. They cleared it out of the way. We're still working on it because the city is adding parks and things like that. The old nasty buildings are gone, but they're adding parks there. Tacoma was just left, basically. A lot of the old factories and things like that, they just left. And so it basically suffered from massive decline. But there were a few people who, for some reason, did certain things to make things happen. If it wasn't for certain folks saying, hey, put the University of Washington Tacoma downtown. The University of Washington Tacoma was going to probably be outside of downtown on the outskirts of the city. But there were a few people who said, no, put it downtown. Folks that were saying, put a convention center, put it downtown. Then Sound Transit. They basically started the Tacoma Light Rail. So it was the first modern light rail or streetcar in the area, right? So they decided to do that as a way of spurring development. So the light rail went from the Tacoma Dome all the way into downtown. It was kind of this idea of, hey, let's use that median that goes down Pack Avenue and other places, because there were several different ways they were going to lay the track. And they decided where they did, which runs right in front of some of these places I mentioned along Pack Avenue. And the hope was that light rail, streetcar, whatever you want to call it, would lead to development. All of these derelict buildings, nastiness would be built up, right? It took a long time for that to happen, but it has happened. Now, they talk about the renaissance of the city. And they talk about there was a lot of different heroes. You know, you can look back at, Harmon Brewery was one of those that took a shot. I forget the name of the guy that owns it, but he owns a lot of different properties downtown. And he and another guy decided to take over the Harmon building. And he converted at a time when no one was going downtown, even when you see all the drug sales and everything out in the open air. He took a building and converted it completely into office space. And down below, the guy that was partnering with him said, let's have a brewery. Let's create a brewery here. Back when breweries were not that big. And so they took an early investment into the city. And they've been there ever since. So they were there when really no one else was around. Then the University of Washington, they took a lot of the old buildings that were there and completely gutted them out, cleaned them up, and used them. These were old industrial buildings, used them for classroom spaces. You couldn't even tell that they were old derelict buildings. They used that. Back in the day, the freight train would run straight through the middle of campus. Not too long ago, mind you. We're talking maybe 6-7 years ago. It ran straight through the university. And so they prevented that. Because the light rail was built the way that it was, they now rerouted that train so that wouldn't be a problem. And so all of these different things happened at the right time. So they said in 1988, they created the business improvement area, and they had property owners pay between 3 and 12 cents per square foot into a fund to clean up 80 blocks, 80 square blocks. Now, there's a man named Jim Burgess who kind of helped spearhead this. And it took a while. There was a lot of stiff opposition, and really and truly, he had to convince at least 60% of the property owners to back it. They got 65% of the support of property owners, and the city council approved it. Had it not been for those business leaders, those property owners, had it not been for them saying, go ahead and tax us, downtown Tacoma would not be what it is today. It would have still been what it was. So back then they said that you would find Jim spray painting the sidewalks with a high pressure hose and shovel and broom and riding a mini street sweeper. And today you'll find him basically doing those same things, but he's also changing out decorative banners downtown. The police department will tell you that statistically downtown is the safest place in Tacoma. And they talk about how they sent a survey to 14,000 downtown workers. And they even say women say downtown. The results led to headlines like women say downtown unsafe, threatened by a stranger. And then victims of theft at work, 12%. Vehicles vandalized, 12%. So they said the month after this was created, so this is not today, but they're saying the month after the business district improvement area was created, they sent out surveys to all of the workers. Because keep in mind, there were still office buildings and stuff down there. And most of the headlines from those surveys were a lot of the women felt unsafe downtown. People were threatened by strangers. There were a lot of theft at work. Vehicles vandalized. A lot of people felt the parking garages were unsafe to park in. So then he even talks about how one night he was trying to clean up and some stranger grabbed him. And so he talks about how over time everything started to shift and change. The police department, for example, got involved. So the BIA, as it's called, raised $620,000 the first year. And with that money, they employed 11 security guards, paid the salaries of 2 police officers, and helped pay for a small substation downtown for the Tacoma Police Department. And so all of those things started to change drastically. Okay? They said the guards have been a big part of it over the years, because a lot of times these guards would dress up, and some of them are police officers, so you don't know who is who. Right? You might think it's just a regular person, but actually it's a police officer. And that still continues to this day. They say every 10 years the BIA is required to renew. And last year, property owners not only signed it to continue until 2028, they added another 44 blocks to the BIA boundaries. Their annual budget now is $1.3 million. So downtown Tacoma, now you can read about this a little bit more, but downtown Tacoma has changed drastically. So when people say that the city is a ghetto and a dump and all this other stuff, it's just not. They're talking about Tacoma back in the, like I said, the middle 80s, early 90s. The city has changed so much that, I mean, even before I moved here to the state, I knew that that wasn't the case. The city has changed so much. Like, you'll see people down there cleaning up the street, cleaning up. You don't see trash down there. I've never seen trash on the streets. You just don't see a whole lot of stuff. I see women walking around at nighttime downtown by themselves. I've never heard of anything. So when I did the drive, I have video of this. When I drove downtown and I showed you guys what downtown's like, that's what it's like. There's not a lot of anything going on. I think that as more people get added to downtown, there will be more and more stuff going on. But even on the weekends, you'll have people going to the different bars and they're stumbling and stuff like that, but you just don't see a whole lot of shenanigans. You don't see a lot of that. I have seen an uptick in homeless people downtown, walking around, roaming around. So stuff like that can be a little bit of a concern. There is a mission down there, so they're probably coming and going from that. But other than that, Tacoma is not what people try to make it out to be. At least downtown's not. Other parts of Tacoma, same thing. I mean, I've showed you in video. That's not to say that there's not certain pockets where you won't have issues. But typically, if you keep to yourself, it's not really an issue. Again, compare downtown Tacoma to downtown Seattle. Big difference. In terms of what you'll see, big difference. So Tacoma has been working on this for quite some time. They've been doing a really, really good job. There's been hundreds of people who were leaders who actually helped make this city what it is to this day. They did a lot of key things. There's a lot of people who are still doing a lot of big things in the city that have really geared us to where we are. So again, take my hat off to those folks. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe. I'm going to put this link down in the bottom so that you can actually check it out. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.